remember having many moments where we realized that there was a huge food crisis in the country, very high levels of child malnutrition and child death.
We recently co-hosted a webinar together, and it was to discuss the release of a new report that the World Food Programme has launched called A Lifeline at Risk.
This explain and break down the impacts of these funding cuts on food security in vulnerable countries. 13.7 million people are going to fall into emergency levels of hunger as a result of these funding cuts. This is telling everybody, watch out. These funding cuts are having an impact on vulnerable people, but especially women, especially children and displaced people who happen to rely on this assistance.
Welcome.
Hi, Paul.
Good to have you here.
Nice to be here.
So you've had an amazing career with the World Food Programme. Can you share a little bit of the journey that you've had with World Food Programme?
So I'm a lifer. I started at WFP right after grad school. And picture this, I was doing my grad school in the US, lived in Boston, got on a plane and started in Niger in West Africa.
Wow.
This was in 2001. It was before the major food crises in the Sahel. And I got a few odd looks from my friends in Boston saying, you're going to Niger to work with the UN. And I said, yeah, I'll try it out. So I show up in Niger, tiny UN office, and I remember having many moments where we realized that there was a huge food crisis in the country, a food crisis that was marked by very high levels of child malnutrition and child death. But this wasn't known at the time, and it brought home to me the importance of understanding problems that might not be obvious at a first glance. So if you look at Niger from outside, you might see a lot of cows, a big desert, but in fact, the people were really suffering. And I think that's what got me started in my career at WFP. I spent the next dozen years in West Africa, worked in Rome, went back to Central Africa. So I've been, for the last 25 years, going from country to country, from post to post, but always focusing on these issues, which is the unknown vulnerabilities that exist all over the world.
And you recently released a book, which you bought me a copy of, which is so great to see. So it's called The New Breadline, Hunger and Hope in the 21st Century. Can you tell us a little bit about what were some of the key themes? Because this has obviously come from this experience that you've had.
Indeed, it's come from my experience working for the World Food Programme in different geographies. So in the book, I take you to what I've seen in West Africa, in Central Africa, but I've also deployed to many different emergencies, including places like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. But what I try to do in this book is also related to who I am. I started my career also because my uncle was a rice farmer in Haiti. My mother's family left Haiti in the 1960s to come to the US, where I was born and raised. The family story is a good starting point for a discussion about hunger issues in the present day. Now, my family had to leave Haiti because of its political run-ins with the Duvalier dictatorship. And this is a dictatorship that undermined not just food security, but also human rights, human dignity, democracy in Haiti. There would have been a path for better things in Haiti if it hadn't been for the father-son dictatorship, which lasted 30 years. But it also set the scene for the collapse of the food system in Haiti. So my uncle Serge was a rice farmer. He had quite a bit of land. I mean, I'm from an elite family in Haiti. We had land, and Serge was growing organic rice in the south of Haiti. He was trying to do that. He was moderately successful. It was always a struggle, but a passion of his. This is what he wanted to do out of life. And I spent quite a bit of time with Serge on his farm when I was a kid, just visiting my uncle. And I mean, to get to this place, you'd have to get on a boat, spend hours. It was usually overnight on the boat from Port-au-Prince to get to this farm. But I found it to be a magical place where great things were happening to build a community from the ground up. Like many other rice farmers, my uncle Serge lost his market in 1992 when the Marines came into Haiti to restore a democratically elected president who'd been in exile in the US. But as part of the deal, Haiti had to agree to open its market to international food imports. Until then, Haiti was basically self-sufficient in food, basically self-sufficient in rice. Today, 30 years later, Haiti imports 80% of its rice and half of its food, and people like my uncle can't make a living anymore. The farm's still there, so I was lucky to see it 2 years ago. People are still there growing rice. They're still successful, but it's a smaller market. They're not competing. They don't have access to the markets in the big cities of Haiti. These farmers aren't in a position to feed their own people, and I find that to be a tragedy. This is what brought me to work on food security issues, because we could do so much better than we're doing right now. And what I wanted to do with this book was blend my personal story with what I'm seeing out there. And when I say out there, it's on the ground in vulnerable communities, and try to set out a path to making things better. What I focused on in this book is the power of the grassroots to change things for the better. I've seen all over the world men, women come together to build a better food future for themselves. And I try to describe that in the places I work, in the places I've lived, because there's a great commonality. Food insecurity is not just a problem that's out there in the arid tropics. It's also an issue in places like right here in Rome, or in the US, in West Virginia, where I have family. And I've seen people come together to build a better, more just food system that works for everybody.
It's so important, and I'm looking forward to digging in, because I think we've had similar experiences and crosses in different parts of the world, but in trying to understand and see why is the system the way it is, and how do we move forward in that space, and what are the potential opportunities. We recently co-hosted a webinar together, and it was to discuss the release of a new report that the World Food Programme has launched called A Lifeline at Risk. What key stories or pieces of information were you really hoping to land with the people that came to that webinar? And what's the thing that you wanted them to walk away with on that day?
So well, first of all, thank you for staying up so late to moderate the webinar. You did great, and we had such engagement during the webinar. It was fantastic. Now, the report is called A Lifeline at Risk, as you mentioned. What we're trying to do in that report is explain and break down the impacts of these funding cuts on food security in vulnerable countries. One number I asked people to take away from the report: 13.7 million people are going to fall into emergency levels of hunger as a result of these funding cuts. That's a substantial number. We've got about 44 million people at that level of hunger before the funding cuts occurred. So this really moves the needle. I mean, add 13.7 million to 44 million, you're talking about close to 58 million.
20% increase,
It's a large increase. It's really a large increase in terms of vulnerability. So this is telling everybody, watch out. These funding cuts are having an impact on vulnerable people, but especially women, especially children, and displaced people who happen to rely on this assistance. So we wanted to bring some stories from the countries we worked in. So we were able to work with teams in Afghanistan, in Haiti, Niger, South Sudan, Uganda, and that's where the information came up from. The number 13.7 is a global number, but then we did a deep dive into these specific countries to look at these impacts. And there are also takeaways for those of us who are hoping to contribute to softening the blow from these funding cuts. One key message is that we need to work together on famine prevention. Of course, we remain committed to zero hunger. That's the mission of the UN. We recognize that that's what we're working on. But perhaps short term, we need to focus on famine prevention, because there are two concurrent famines right now. Since the system we use to measure famine worldwide, the IPC, was created 20 years ago, there have only been 5 confirmed famines. There was one in Somalia in 2011. There was South Sudan in 2017, South Sudan again in 2020, and then Sudan last year, and now Gaza. So these things are few and far between, but now we're facing 2 at the same time. And we're seeing an increase in the most extreme levels of hunger. Now, the system we use to monitor hunger has 5 different levels of vulnerability. People in category 5 are the most vulnerable, and we've seen a 20x increase in the number of people in category 5 in the past few years. So let's focus on these most severe crises. Let's focus on bringing assistance to those who are in extreme vulnerability. That's what famine prevention is about. Let's collaborate, let's innovate, let's do everything we can to prevent famines on our watch.
So in the data, you've shared a little bit about some of the things that have kind of jumped out from there. What would you say, where is the most severe impacts happening? Is it at that IPC 4, 5 transition? Where are you seeing that? And particularly on the food, nutrition, long-term as well, like what are we seeing?
So I'd say the most critical impact is with child nutrition, because it's so strategic in anyone's life.
And you can't recover from that sometimes.
Well, it's irreversible.
Yeah.
So we're seeing children no longer consume essential foods like dairy. In the case of Uganda, you've got refugees in Uganda who are no longer consuming dairy. Children under 5 no longer consuming dairy. If you have a deficit, or if you fall into malnutrition below 5 and it's not treated, you will carry those consequences with you the rest of your life. So we are talking about things that are irreversible. So let's focus on this issue. Let's focus on this very vulnerable group, because they are tomorrow for all of us. They are the ones whose future matters, and it's being compromised by these cuts. And we had my colleague John Alia from Afghanistan telling us in very emotional terms what it was like for his team on the ground. We heard that hundreds of health centers in Afghanistan no longer offer nutrition support, and you've got mothers walking hours to come to a health center, hoping to have some food for their child, and that are being turned away. He said 9 out of 10 are being turned away. And again, children, these are the future of that country, and these impacts that we're seeing could well be irreversible. And for Afghanistan, we've seen already a 16% increase in the number of people suffering from acute malnutrition.
I was just reading an article in the BBC about a woman having to choose between her 2 twins because she couldn't afford to keep both of them alive. And I think these big numbers, sometimes when they come down to individual stories, they break your heart, because they move from this big number of, which is hard to get our heads around sometimes. But I always think we have to bring these points down. And I think the report does that in an amazing way by focusing in on countries and what does that actually mean.
Behind all of these numbers, and I mentioned a lot of numbers, they're individuals, they're women, they're children, they're very vulnerable people. And we tried to weave in their perspective into the report.
Yeah.
And it's important to hear both, to understand the magnitude, the sheer magnitude of these impacts, but also what it means for people on the ground.
So women's organizations and local actors are often the first to feel these cuts when they happen.
Indeed.
So what risks does this pose to gender equality, to community resilience, in the short term and the longer term?
Well, one of the worries I have is the impact on the relationship between the civil society actors, so women organizations, local organizations, and the more institutional actors like the UN, like the large NGOs. Because what happened earlier on this year is that contracts were cut, sometimes with very short notice. Distributions were canceled. I was the WFP country director in Haiti between 2022 and 2024, and I can tell you that there are always tensions there. People always wonder, you in the international community, who are you? How do you support us? What's the impact of what you've been here for such a long time? And so there's always been a bit of mistrust or skepticism in the air. And what these funding cuts have done is damage that relationship. And what's the saying is that you build trust in ounces and you lose it in kilos. And I think rebuilding that trust and that relationship between local actors and civil society actors and the humanitarian community, that's a very big gap right now. But then there's also obviously been the financial impact on these structures. We're talking a lot about localization in the humanitarian sector right now. That means working more with local NGOs, with local private sector, rather than bringing everything in from outside, which is a great approach. But of course, when these funding cuts hit, what we saw is that the national NGOs were the most vulnerable. They immediately had to fire staff. They immediately had to shut down offices. They immediately had to curtail their presence. The UN and larger NGOs have a bit more of a reserve, a bit more of a cushion. So it's as you said, these actors who are critical, they're that last link between the humanitarian system and the vulnerable population, well, they're the most at risk.
And when we think about this, there's obviously the impacts of the immediate hunger that has a profound impact on people. What are some of the longer term or less visible consequences of these cuts? Like we think about, stability in countries, we think about education, we think about broader development gains.
What we saw, an interesting insight from the study is that when we do food distributions, we measure what food consumption is like before and after. Our distributions are just not as effective anymore in one of the countries we looked at. And our hypothesis is that everyone was cut. So not just the food sector, but also the health sector, the nutrition sector. So when all sectors suffer, you can try to do something in your own space, it just won't be as effective because there are these dependencies between the different sectors, and that's clearly an issue. We also saw that work on longer-term resilience programs is affected. In Niger, for example, WFP's worked for years to try to build livelihoods in a drought-prone environment. And we were saying that about 500,000 people in Niger had been removed from the roles of humanitarian assistance because we've been able to boost their livelihoods. They no longer rely on help. And there was a drought in 2022, and these people, 500,000, didn't need food assistance after that drought, which was a big win. But this is rolling a ball up the hill. You need to continue providing some support to these communities. And what we saw in 2025 is that you remove the support, well, then the ball starts rolling back down the hill, and that's a loss. These are gains that were accumulated over years that we're now losing. And as you mentioned, there are broader impacts, non-humanitarian impacts of these budget cuts. Look, in a country like South Sudan, 25% of GDP is overseas development assistance. Take away the overseas development assistance or reduce it substantially, that leaves a big gap in the macroeconomy of South Sudan. So that could mean impacts on the exchange rate. It could mean impacts on inflation. It could mean the stability, the economic stability of the country is at risk. And what we also saw in South Sudan is that in that country, because of reduced assistance, we're seeing population outflows, people going back to Sudan or to Sudan because there's simply not enough to subsist on in South Sudan. And that confirms a well-established link between hunger and migration. We did work on that about 10 years ago at the time of the Syrian crisis. It is very clear that when hunger increases, the probability of migrating increases, by the way, much more than food insecurity. So be on the lookout. We think there are clouds on the horizon. The declining food consumption that we're seeing, the declining nutrition status that we're seeing will have impacts on the macroeconomy, on migration, probably on stability for countries that are looking for a path to stability. And that might, and this might be a wrench in the works for those societies.
So we've got these obvious shrinking aid budgets that are a new reality. They've been kind of happening for a little while, but accelerated all of a sudden very quickly. What are some of the most urgent shifts that we need to see in the way we do humanitarian work? You've talked about famine prevention, but how do we make this more resilient? What are the kind of ways we need to be thinking about this?
The first thing we need to do is make sure that the work humanitarians do is very much aligned with local priorities. That's the first thing that must be done. There's a silver lining in all of this. I don't want to overstate it, but in Haiti, for example, the government of Haiti has been increasing its allocations to humanitarian programs as a result of this situation. And I remember speaking to Haitian government officials last summer, and they told me, well, when these funding cuts hit, they got together and they discussed the situation, and the result was more funding to the benefit of the Haitian population, which is a good thing. The other thing that's really interesting in that country is that it's a country with about a GDP of about $20 billion, and $4 billion out of the $20 billion come from the diaspora. And the diaspora of Haiti, mostly in the US, so people like my mother, actively send money back to the country, and that and supports food security, supports a lot of other sectors, but including the purchase of food in Haiti. And it's interesting that the humanitarian appeal for Haiti this year it's the least funded in the world at the time we wrote the report. It was $1 billion, but only received about $90 million of support. So it was 9% funded.
Wow.
But put that in comparison with what the diaspora is sending in. $4 billion from the diaspora, and the humanitarian community is bringing in 90 million. So how could we perhaps have a handshake between both? How could the humanitarians better work with the diasporas or coordinate or enable? And I think that's what I'm saying about aligning what the humanitarians do with what the government does and with what actors on the ground might be doing. Now, of course, it's a challenge. Diaspora and civil society groups are numerous and not necessarily coordinated, but this is really up to the humanitarians to find a way of making that link. For WFP overall, we've seen in the past years that host governments are funding more and more of what we do, and I think that means that there's a closer alignment, and that's positive. The example I'd like to give is the homegrown school feeding program in Haiti.
Yeah.
The school meals program in Haiti was created in the 1950s and was largely funded by agricultural surpluses coming from outside. And that shifted in the past 10 years, where WFP and the government said, let's test buying directly from farmers. And as I speak, we went from 100% imported to imports being a tiny minority of the food that's being distributed. You've got about 600,000 Haitian school children who get a homegrown school meal right now. And that's because the government has a policy to commit to 100% homegrown school feeding by 2030, and the country will get to 100% by 2030, in spite of everything that's going on in the country. And they're also funding the providers of school meals. And that's just a very different way of doing things, because when you buy the food for the school meals locally, not only do the kids get an amazingly tasty meal, I mean, you've got vegetables and that you wouldn't get if it's the traditional way of doing school feeding. So the meal's better, it's more nutritious, it tastes great. But the farmers get an opportunity. They get income.
Yeah.
It's about 5,000 hectares of land in Haiti that's cropped every day just for the school meals program. It's really protected agriculture. And it's thousands of small farmers who are contributing to it and who are protecting it, who are benefiting from that with positive impacts on the country. So I think this is where I see the silver lining by more closely collaborating with governments, local entities, and civil society.
Are there any other stories of like how you can do more with less in that sense? Like this is a great one of sort of a shift, but is there ones where we've been able to be more effective in this kind of space?
One of the things that we're looking at is leveraging the cost efficiencies that we can find with cash programming.
Okay.
So in South Sudan, we sat down with a country office. We're looking for every opportunity to be more effective.
Yeah.
And we at WFP can provide food, but we can also provide a mobile money transfer or cash in envelopes. And doing it with cash is usually cheaper when conditions allow. It's of course not something you can do everywhere in a country like South Sudan, but we mapped the entire country, looked at what the food markets are doing, and we realized that there were some opportunities for doing a bit more cash.
Yep.
So we went for those, and that will just stretch our budget much further. So that's a great way for us to be able to do perhaps better with less.
I wanted to ask you, if you were speaking directly to a decision maker in a donor country, what would you say is the one message that you really wanted to communicate to them?
I would say focus on famine prevention.
Yeah.
Don't lose sight of the long-term issues, because there's only so far that famine prevention will take you, because these issues will come up again and again. So also think long-term. And I would also encourage the decision maker to protect information systems. I've mentioned a lot of numbers in this interview. These numbers come from information systems that have been set up by the humanitarian community in partnership with governments and actors on the ground for the past 40 years. The data we have that allows us to say, yes, there was a famine in Gaza. Yes, there's a famine in Sudan. Those are expensive, but they're invaluable.
Yeah.
They're under threat right now because of the funding cuts.
Yeah.
We're hearing from our donors, try to precision target your assistance, try to hyper prioritize your assistance. And we understand that in a context of,
data?
You need the information. Yeah. The data needs to flow. Data happens to be our collective GPS.
Yeah.
With these funding cuts, we might lose the GPS.
Yeah.
The GPS might switch off, and then we could get lost. We might be going in the wrong direction. We might miss a famine. We might miss a situation of increasing needs. So my plea to to the decision makers are, let's make sure we safeguard these information systems. Of course, we need to find every way of finding savings, of rationalizing and optimizing what these information systems do, but let's protect them because we need them to do our job.
Look, obviously, this is some pretty heavy topics, and data is so critical. Where can people find this report and access it to dig in a little bit more?
All right, so if you go to Google and type in a lifeline at risk, you will find it ought to pop up. You can find it on the WFP website. We've also promoted it through the Global Network Against Food Crises. They do amazing work in raising awareness with policymakers about food issues worldwide. So look at the Global Network Against Food Crisis website. They will have the report. So there's an overall brief. It's a fairly short global summary. That's where you've got the 13.7 million. But then you've also got these 5 country reports that I encourage people to dig into, and you'll find all that through the Global Network Against Food Crisis on the WFP website. The report is called A Lifeline at Risk.
Obviously, we want to bring this back to what we want for everyone. We want everyone to have the right kind of access to food. Food's something that connects us. It's something that is part of our identity. It's part of what we need. And one thing that I love to ask people in this podcast is it's about this connection, because I've found no matter in a refugee camp on the border somewhere, or in the streets of New York, or a restaurant, or at a school, you ask somebody, what are you enjoying eating, or what would you like to eat? And all of a sudden it brings us together. Food is something that connects us. And so I wanted to ask you, what are you enjoying eating at the moment? Is there something an ingredient, a dish that...
There is great question, and you're absolutely right. Food is who we are.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite spots in Rome is Mercato Esquilino.
Okay.
It's right near Termini Station, and it's where I'll go on Saturday mornings to buy my fruits and vegetables for the week. And last time I went, it's the fall, and I saw for the first time this year, pumpkin. They'll sell thick chunks, like you get a good slice for a couple euros, and for me, I'll make a soup out of it. I will peel it, fry it with garlic and spices, and turn it into a soup. So the soup is actually a soup that reminds me of a dish I would have on Sundays as a child. In Haiti, the pumpkin soup is something that we eat on Sundays and on the 1st of January, which is Independence Day for Haiti. Okay. It's called soup joumou. So it's not exactly the same pumpkin that we have here, but it's pretty close. Yeah. It's an orange flesh, golden orange. Wow. And the story was that Haiti was born out of a slave revolt, a successful revolution that overthrew the French and got freedom to, at the time, about 500,000 former slaves. During slavery, slaves weren't allowed to eat pumpkin soup. That was the masters. And when Haiti was free, people were able to eat pumpkin soup, and therefore it's important to have your pumpkin soup on a Sunday, because it's not just food; it's also your freedom. So for me, when I see the pumpkins come out of the fields and into the markets in the fall in Rome, I will buy a thick slice, and I'll make myself some pumpkin soup. Soup joumou in Haitian. There are many variations in the recipe. The traditional one has beef in it. I try not to eat meat, so I have my own version. But it does speak to, again, our history, our identity, and it just tastes great. So I remember telling this story to the guy who was selling me my pumpkin the other day, and he said, "Well, here in Italy, it's a poor man's dish." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting. Each of us has our own relationship to the foods we eat."
No, thank you for sharing. I find there's often those connections of what often sometimes people perceive as poor man's or peasant food is often now we're reclaiming that or recognizing those stories behind it, and it's so powerful, and it brings so much more meaning and depth to why food connects with us and how food connects with us. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for continuing to shine a light on the real challenges and the real hotspots, I guess, around the world that are needing our help. And we'll continue to try and raise awareness about this and see how we can drive forward real change.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's great to talk.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.